Let me start by greeting the audience and thanking the organizers of this meeting, especially Gaël Becquet, for inviting me to take part in the session on how to identify quality open access journals and separate the wheat from the chaff. Recently, a proliferation of fraudulent journals has been observed. It is estimated there are at least 16,000 of them out of an estimated total of at least 300,000 registered scholarly journal titles. In some cases, these journals are associated with fraudulent conferences. Even some mainstream journals indexed in the big commercial indices belong to this group. People who use these illegitimate practices have developed an extraordinary ability to deceive authors and readers. How to distinguish a predatory scientific journal from one that is not? What to do when one falls prey? What consequences do these practices have for the different actors and for the publishing system as a whole? What to do to prevent their proliferation? In the first part of my talk, I will briefly present an in-depth study of the phenomenon carried out by a group of experts convened by the Inter-Academy Partnership. In the second part, I will offer a brief overview of fraudulent practices in Latin America and the measures adopted to identify and deal with them. The IAP report is the culmination of 22 months' work led by an international working group of 12 experts covering a variety of disciplines, with a secretariat from the UK and US. As you can see from this slide, we came from different parts of the world: South Africa, Ethiopia, Benin, Egypt, Mexico, Brazil, Jordan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Ireland, and Sweden. We all represented our national academies of sciences, and I had the privilege of also representing Latindex. The IAP report, available in English, is accompanied by a summary in 7 different languages. As you can see from the objective, it is actions-oriented, solutions-based, and speaks to the system as a whole, especially to stakeholders whose action can effect systemic change. And, as you can see from the methodology, we worked quite intensely during those almost 2 years, with good results. A better understanding of what is meant by predatory journals and conferences, the extent to which they have penetrated the community, what can be done to combat them, and a greater awareness of the various actors involved. We conducted a global survey of researchers, and over 1,800 researchers from 112 countries responded to it voluntarily. Over 80% of them told us that predatory journals and conferences are already a serious problem or on the rise in their country of work. In Latin America and the Caribbean, it was perceived that the problem is on the rise. However, the percentage of respondents that admitted having fallen prey is relatively low, either by ignorance or because they preferred not to admit it. There are several attempts to define a predatory journal in the extensive literature on the subject. Google already reports nearly 8 million results, much more than we could see in our review on the literature. But it became clear to us that defining with a few words what a predatory journal is, or fraudulent or illegitimate or thrash or spurious, whatever you want to call it, is as difficult and useless as briefly defining what a table is. Moreover, fraudulent practices continue to evolve and become more difficult to distinguish from poor quality, unethical, and questionable publishing practices. For instance, large publishers that started with deceptive practices have managed to employ these just to gain a respectable space in the international publishing system. What can be done is to list characteristics that make one suspect that a journal is fraudulent or deceptive. So, instead of a simple definition, we produced a table with the main dubious characteristics, which is summarized here. On the extreme left, we have fraudulent, deceptive journals. In the middle, low-quality journals. Towards the right, not-so-low-quality journals. Then questionable ones, journals that are often thought to be good, perhaps because they are published by reputable publishers. And finally, on the extreme right, are the quality journals. The report contains a similar spectrum for predatory conferences, which, according to a specialist, already outnumber the legitimate ones. Another part of our work was to identify tools for users. Some of these are publicly available, like author aid, while others, like Cabell's, are pay-for-subscription services. An increasing number of universities are also developing their own guides and checklists. As you can imagine, the development of all these tools means a lot of investment in time, in effort, and in money. In order to formulate recommendations, it was essential to understand what is behind this phenomenon. Therefore, the core of our work was to try and identify its root causes. What motivates it? What drives it? What feeds it? We approached these questions without prejudice and, interestingly, we converged quite naturally on the three answers summarized here. The main drivers are the monetization and commercialization of research output, with the APC model being especially prone to abuse. Second, the research evaluation systems, where quantity overrides quality, together with the institutional drivers and incentives that shape the behavior of academics. And lastly, this lack of transparency in the peer review process, which is exacerbated, of course, by poor training, capacity, and recognition of peer reviewers. This served as a basis for a series of recommendations to the different actors involved or affected by it. These main stakeholders are the research community itself, of course, in the first place, higher education institutions, multilateral organizations, and the other institutions mentioned here, in particular the libraries and indexing services. The libraries and indexing services are numerous and range from inventories or directories such as the ISSN or the Latindex directory to selective commercial systems which include journal titles based on the citations received by their articles. The list comprises also open access catalogs for journals of proven editorial quality, such as the Latindex catalog, and more recently also DOAJ. One of the recommendations of the IAP report is precisely to use the experience of Latindex to create a universal catalog that establishes minimum standards of quality and practice and promotes their compliance. My presentation of the IAP report ends with a selection of important initiatives underway precisely to drive the reform of current academic performance assessment systems and their criteria, as this was identified as a root cause. Let us now turn to the Latin American landscape. In Latin America, there are a series of initiatives that make up a truly regional ecosystem that supports and disseminates academic journals published in the region. In particular, Latindex, created in 1996, has played a pioneering role as part of this ecosystem. It functions as a self-sustained network of national centers where the day-to-day work of compiling information of the journals published in the country is carried out. Latindex provides freely accessible information through two databases, which have already been mentioned. One is the directory, which is a broad inventory with more than 26,000 registered journals. And the second one is the catalog, which is a subset composed only of those journals that meet editorial quality criteria. To date, nearly 3,000 online journals have managed to enter the catalog, and the process continues, of course. Of the more than 26,000 journals registered in the Latindex directory, which includes those of Spain and Portugal, plus the journals on Ibero-American studies published elsewhere, 12,380 are already accessible online. As you can see from this graph, leaving aside Spain, the incidence of suspicious or fraudulent journals is quite low in the region, of the order of 40 titles out of a total of 112 suspicious journals. What is the reason for this low incidence? Well, we have the great advantage that non-commercial publication of journals is widespread in Latin America and the Caribbean, thanks to the fact that these are normally supported or even edited or published by the academic or scientific institutions themselves, the vast majority of which are public. Therefore, suspicious or fraudulent journals, which are commercial because that's what they live on, have little roots in the region. In fact, it is more common for our authors to fall prey to predatory journals published in other countries outside the region. Genuine open access is no business. Even so, as you have seen in the graph, there are some publishers in Iberoamerica that do their business taking advantage of the pressure to publish that academics are subject to. Rather than isolated journals, there are a few publishers that produce a collection of journal titles in different disciplines. Contrary to claims often found in the literature linking predatory practices to the open access movement, we can safely say that such practices are neither a cause nor a consequence of open access, certainly not of free, non-commercial open access. They respond to different causes and contexts, as confirmed by the IAP report. So, how do we separate the wheat from the chaff? How do we detect fraudulent journals and prevent their entry into the Latindex catalog? This is a non-trivial task, because there are no clear-cut indicators, as I discussed earlier. The good news is that Latindex has been a spearhead in more ways than one. We started detecting questionable journals in 2017. From there, we created a working group which functions as a review board to analyze the cases in detail when necessary. The main product created by this working group is the Guide for Editors, which is a training and advice tool. For its possible entry into the catalog, compliance of the journal with quality criteria is checked on its website, and up to 3 issues published are reviewed when necessary. The methodology handles mandatory characteristics focused on verifying the existence of editorial bodies, the solvency of the publishing institution, and transparency in the manuscript review processes, among others. Special attention is recommended when a journal exhibits poor quality or deceitful practices. And if that is the case, the rating stops and the opinion of the review board is sought, which has experience in detecting unreliable practices. Most dubious journals apply article processing charges, but Latindex does not rely on this as a sole indicator. Revision and update processes are applied when a journal is indicated, generally by sources external to Latindex, as potentially predatory. Fraudulent publishers put pressure on us to get their journals included in the catalog, sometimes with legal threats, so we have placed a note on the website reserving the right to list them. What we cannot do is denounce them. What can we do to further make progress in this regard? Well, collective action is important. We must work together to promote open science, reduce the commercialization and monetization of academia because it is a root cause, strengthen the value of the journals published in our countries by non-profit academic entities, reject the excessive use and reliance on quantitative metrics in research evaluation, and promote alternative ways of recognizing research quality, and strengthen the institution of transparent peer review in academia. In various regional fora, the problem has been addressed and conclusions very similar to those of the IAP study have been reached. In particular, one of the main conclusions points to the need, as I said, to reform evaluation systems and the criteria applied by them. In this regard, I would like to mention the work undertaken by GLACSO, which is the Latin American Council for Social Sciences, through a dedicated space called FOLEC, which operates since 2019. Here are some selected references where you can find further material on what I have presented today. And here is a list of the bibliography of the project of the Inter-Academic Partnership. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention.
Well, I want to thank once again Ana Maria Seto, and I'm so sorry she cannot be here today with us. She's a very nice personality, and if you want to get in touch with her, it's really easy. I suppose that the recorded video will be available after the conference, and you have, I mean, it's easy to find her contact on the Latindex page, as well as the contact of José Octavio Alonso Gamboa, who works closely, I mean, he also works at UNAM at the library there, and he's also very much involved with Latindex activities. So I will now just put the other slides online in the second presentation, which is a presentation about the directory of open access journals. Here again, we were supposed, so it's very hard, you know, when you organize a session and you want your colleagues to be here in Charleston, but you know, there are some conflicts sometimes that arise. So I'm so sorry that our colleague from DOHA, so the director, Joanna Ball, and also the editors, Tom Olijuk and Julie Barnsby, cannot be here today. But they were kind enough to prepare the presentation, and we had a kind of rehearsal session with them. So I hope I won't, you know, betray their message. And here again, you know, you will have on the last slide some context, and please just get in touch if you want to know more about what DOHA does to identify quality journals. So Tom and Julie's prepared these slides, and the idea was, you know, based on the IAP report, to find how DOHA process to actually select open access journals to be listed in the directory of open access journals, how these selection criteria were in line with the IAP report. So as you may know, you're certainly familiar with what DOHA does. Journals have to apply if they want to be indexed in DOHA, and they have to fill in quite a long and lengthy form to actually get considered for listing. Of course, DOHA only lists fully open access journals, and they use some quality criteria which are aligned with the principles of transparency and best practice in scholarly publishing. These principles you can find online, so I think there is a link here to these principles. The journals are reviewed by DOHA editorial staff. We'll come to that in a moment to see how this works. And of course, they rely also on the work of volunteer editors who are scattered all around the world. So they have, you know, editors who actually review journals in their own countries. Here are some of the DOHA criteria for inclusion. We are quite happy that the first one is about ISSN. As you may know, we've been working with DOHA. We have a partnership with them for many, many years. and they get some information from the ISSN register for free. So actually they have like 20 accounts or something for their staff and also editors, so that they can check whether a journal is registered with an ISSN. And of course we also work closely with them because, as you may know, many publishers use their print ISSN for their online journal, and so we need to get some information. DOAJ helps us in identifying these journals which do not use the correct ISSN. So this is a win-win partnership we have with them. Of course, these journals must be peer-reviewed, and they also must use an open license, and you are familiar also with the Creative Commons licenses, so that's also a requirement with DOAJ. Same thing as with Latindex and with also Road. I'll come to that later. There needs to be a clear copyright policy, which is clearly described on the website, on the journal's website, and also, and that's maybe different from Latindex. That's because in DOAJ you can find journals which actually have APCs. So it's different from Latindex, because Latindex puts the emphasis on non-APC journals. DOAJ, on the contrary, also accepts or lists journals with APCs. Of course, this is only a selection of criteria. I mean, it would be too tedious to go through the whole list of DOAJ criteria. I can only refer you to their website, where you can find the list. And again, it's a very complete process if journal editors want to get listed. So these are some statistics for 2021. They have in 2021 they had a bit more than 10,000 applications and updates for journals listed in DOAJ, or which want to be listed in DOAJ. As you can see, it takes a bit less than 3 months to proceed with the application, which is also a good average time for processing all the data, because they receive applications from all over the world, and they also encourage applications from journals in all the in various parts of the world. And they are also quite strict, because on these 10,000 applications, they only accept 35%. So 1/3 of the applications are actually, selected or approved for inclusion in DOAJ. And I was mentioning the number of people involved in the process. As you can see, it's quite a number. More than 120, because DOAJ, is a small organization, so there are like 5 or 6 professional editors working with DOAJ, but they rely on volunteer work. They have ambassadors in various countries who help them, just sort out journals. So here is the process with DOAJ. As you can see, it's a circular process with various stages. So there is first the application through a form which is available on the website. And there is a first triage, and this is done by a librarian employed with DOAJ. And they check all the basic criteria in the form. So that's the first step, for the selection. Then the journal goes to the DOAJ associate editor, and there is a second review of the journal, and some recommendation or evaluation are done at this stage, or are made at this stage by the editors. In the end, the managing editor takes a final decision, and there are 3 possibilities or 3 options. The journal is rejected, it's approved, and it gets the seal. So maybe you're familiar also with the DOAJ seal. There are 2 levels, and it's very, it can be compared with Latindex in this aspect. Anna Maria early on mentioned the fact that there are two levels in Latindex. There is the Latindex Catalogo, which is broader, actually, than the Latindex Directorio, which is more selective. So there are, I think she said 12,000, or no, 25,000 in the Directorio, and only 3,000 in the Catalogo. So it's the same thing with, I mean, the same policy is applied by DOAJ. So they have, the global DOAJ index with, I don't remember the figure here, but which is broader than the journals, the list of journals which have received the DOAJ seal. So it's same thing. You have two levels of selections. What is interesting with the DOAJ assessment process is that, even if a journal is rejected, the editor can come back and apply again. And so what DOAJ does, what the editors do, is that they give, the editors some information on when they can apply again. Okay, depending on the number of criteria they don't, abide with. So, for example, if there are many criteria or many, flows to the journal, then DOAJ can say, okay, come back to us, within 1 year or within 1 year and a half. When you will have, when you will make progress with all the various criteria that were required. Sometimes it's 6 months, depending, on the issues which were identified by the DOAJ team. So that's, it means that, for editors it's also, and that's something interesting compared to, or when you look at the spectrum, of questionable practices that has been devised by the IAP, that it's not, it's not either black or white, or either, you're questionable or you're predatory and your journal is okay and it's good and it can be listed. It's more like, there is a gray zone, or it's a spectrum, so you can make progress, and there is no, editors can come back and, just be more in line with the criteria after a while. So it's also very educational, I would say, what DOAJ does, to help editors, make progress. So, as you can see here, 35% of applications are rejected at the initial triage stage. This is what I was mentioning just before, the idea is to help editors make progress and also have journals of better quality afterwards. So the average, period of between two applications is approximately 6 months, and very low quality journals can be asked to wait for 1 year in order to improve. It's also, I guess it's also because the DOAJ team doesn't want to review, the same journals again and again if they haven't made any, improvement. So it's, it's a small team, let's say, so they don't want to to redo the work all the time on specific titles. So all applications are monitored for questionable practices, and as you can see, editors can just mark a journal if there is a need for additional review, and there are, as you were able to see in the design or the diagram, there are several stages of applications and for applications to go through. So there are several reviews on each application. There is a quality control team. I was mentioning the professional editors with DOAJ, and if journals are identified as questionable, they can even wait up to 2 or 3 years before being allowed to apply again to DOAJ. So that's how they deal. Our DOAJ deals with first applications, initial applications. But they also, of course, review the journals which have already been listed in the directory, and they periodically review them as it is recommended in the IAP report, especially when journals are inactive, or they are no longer open access, or they don't meet the criteria anymore. So this is also a huge task, actually, to do that when you consider the number of journals or titles which are listed in DOAJ. So what is really important also to know is that when a journal is removed from DOAJ, there is a public list where you can check which titles have been removed, and there is also a public list for titles which have been added. And I know that they're working on some APIs or OAI PMH, services to be able to retrieve this information also from DOAJ directly. Because here this list is on a Google Doc, Google Documents, which is open to anyone, but they're trying to automate this in their database. They also listen to reports from the community, from their ambassadors of questionable activity by index journals, and some journals that are questionable are removed, and if in that case they are not allowed to reapply for at least for up to 3 years, which is also, I would say, something journals do not want to. I mean, this is not a good image or to convey to users or readers when you are not allowed to, when you are not listed in the DOAJ, because DOAJ is so well known, and if you have to wait for 3 years for the journal, it's also a drawback, I would say. Okay, so this is it for the presentation about DOAJ, the DOAJ application process. So you can contact Tom or Judith, who actually prepared these slides. If you have questions, I can try to answer now. Otherwise, I can also just convey your questions. I mean, you can also, since most of you have your computers, maybe they will be happy to know that the presentation was given now today, and receive some questions about it. So it's up to you. Either you write to Tom and Judith, or I will be happy to answer questions if you have, and if I can. I'm sorry for that. Yes, please.
Actually, this isn't a question, but a solicitation. My name is Steve Shadle. I'm the head of serials cataloging at the University of Washington Libraries. I coordinate an annual volunteer project that does full-level cataloging of all of the titles newly added to DOAJ that are distributed through the concert program to all of the discovery services. So when you see a full-level catalog record in your discovery system for a DOAJ title, it is because of the 20 volunteer libraries that we have cataloging them. I would like to put out a request. If any of you have serial cataloging operations that are might be interested in volunteering, typically we have enough support from the 20 institutions to be able to cover DOAJ, and that's about it. But we would love to be able to expand the full-level cataloging activity to other open access collections like Latinx, Latin Index, and Road. We just haven't had the bandwidth to be able to do that. So if any of you work at libraries where your serial cataloging operation might want to contribute, this might be their opportunity for cataloging to contribute to OA activities. You might be able to justify it that way. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen, and hello, by the way.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Hello, Anthony.
I ought to go near the microphone, shouldn't I, really? But, no, there isn't one here, is there? It's over there, so I can't get to pick up. I'll speak clearly. Gail knows me. I must admit I don't work for ISSM as a researcher, and also for Cobell, who was mentioned earlier. I'll just say to you quickly, Cabell is commercial, but their processes are very good. I was able to look into them as part of the work. But I guess just a sideline. I've also been working in recent years, in 2016, on early career researchers, interviewing them in not just me, 8 countries. And the overall picture is that early career researchers never think of asking librarians at all. Okay? What's wrong? What are you librarians doing to prevent them from coming to see you? Anybody say? They don't ask about predatory journals, certainly. Anywhere in the world, they don't ask about predatory journals. They ask their peers, they ask their seniors, who are out of touch often, and they don't ask librarians. Okay, we'll have that.
So, I was just going to ask you, what have the early career researchers said about librarians? Why don't they?
They don't talk to them.
Why don't they?
Because they don't know that they're people they should talk to. They're many of them from being undergraduates. They think there's something to do with students.
So I think, Anthony, your question assumes that if we were doing things right, they would be talking to us about predatory journals, and I think that's half true. That assumption is half true. I think part of the problem is that we as librarians are very reluctant to talk about predatory publishing. We're very reluctant to acknowledge that it's actually a problem, because when we acknowledge that it's a problem, that tends to get interpreted as a criticism of open access. And so it's a very difficult conversation for librarians, in my experience, as somebody who's been trying to talk about predatory journals for the past 10 years. Getting librarians to acknowledge that predatory publishing is a problem is in itself difficult. And for us to actively go out and say to researchers, this is a problem out there of which you need to be aware, and here are some steps that you need to take to avoid getting ensnared in it, that requires us to acknowledge that it's actually a problem.
Thank you. I think time flies, and very sorry for that, because maybe there's someone afterwards. Okay, so just really quickly, so we work with DOAJ, we work with Latindex, and we work with them because we have a directory of open access scholarly resources, and it's about the same, scheme as I've described before with DOAJ and with Latindex. There are 2 levels of selection in the ISSN register. There is the ISSN register, so we have more than 2.5 million journals indexed there, with approximately 300,000 digital journals. But we also have the directory of open access scholarly resources, which is ROAD, and where there are approximately 50,000 journals indexed. So these are the 2 levels, let's say. So I will be quick because I don't want to take too much of your time. Here are some figures about ROAD, because we have actually all our national centers, all the ISSN national centers participating. And maybe you know that in Indonesia, since 2019, there is a special regulation requesting academic departments to create their own journals. So this is the reason why you can see that there was a boom in open access journals produced in Indonesia, and they ranked first in ROAD with a bit more than 13,000 journals indexed. Then comes France and Turkey and the US. So we actually, all these countries participate in the directory by just indicating when they create an ISSN a record, if the journal is open access, and so it goes into ROAD. So we also work with all these databases that share information with us. So the idea was to, in a way, show that some open access titles actually are also indexed with other databases. The idea being, the more databases they are indexed with, the better they are, the highest quality they have. And so we actually retrieve information from all these databases. As you can see, Crossref, DOAJ, the Keepers, Scopus, and Latindex. The idea being, that when you look at the journal, at the title, you can see also where it is indexed. So we cross-reference actually these titles. So for example, this is the title breast cancer research, which is online with the ISSN, and as you can see, it's indexed in various, partner databases. So meaning this is, a quality journal. I mean, we can suppose it is. We do not only index journals. We also index monographic series, scholarly blogs. Of course, journals are the majority, but we try, to develop Road to include more resources, more materials. We made good progress with the scholarly blogs recently. So we're trying to diversify, which materials are indexed in Road. So we, in this year, in 2022, we reviewed the selection criteria because, Road is very big, it's very international, but it's also, much bigger than other indexes. And the idea was that maybe we should straighten the criteria to align with also the current selection practices implemented by our partners. As you can see, I was mentioning Latindex Directorio and Catalogo and DOAJ. So the idea was, to be more in line with criteria implemented by other open access databases, journal databases or resources databases. So this is what we did in 2022. There are now new selection criteria implemented in Road. You can have, you have a link here on the presentation. So the idea is to be stricter regarding open access from the beginning of the publication to the latest issue. This is also important. We've heard Anna Maria mentioning this criterion as well. Also the country where the resource is published, the open license, the open access policy mentioned, etc., etc. And very important, the academic affiliation, because if they are scholarly, they must depend, on an academic department. And also, what we tried also to implement was that, our national centers, and Anna Maria mentioned that briefly, can have some pressure put on them, to index their journals in Road. And the idea is, in that case, if there is one false, statement made by the editor of a journal, then, the National Center can refuse to index it in Road. So, as Anna Maria was stating earlier, you cannot, you're free to not index them, but you cannot denounce them. So, for example, we don't circulate a list, of questionable journals, or we just, refuse to have them indexed in our database. So what we also did in 2022 was to recheck a bit more than 3,000 titles. They were reviewed actually by a member of staff at the ISSNIC to check, all the criteria. And as you can see in the end, we removed nearly half of these titles from Road because there were issues with URL, and the journal could not be found anywhere on the web. There were hybrid journals. They were not completely open access. Some didn't have any article available. Or they had non-academic content. So these are, the main reasons why, we removed some titles from Road, and some, as you can see, 1,600 approximately were maintained in Road. And regarding the countries, actually, a lot of journals from India were reassessed. As well as journals from Iran, etc., etc. I'm not sure I have the number of journals per country which were removed. I could ask the team to do something like that, to have this figure. But as you can see, the idea was, because our criteria were set in 2013, it was, time to review them. So this is the reason why we started this process. Of course, we're not alone to do that at the ISIS and IC. We started, I mean, we did our share with the 3,000 and something, but we rely on the national centers, so they know about the new criteria and they are trained to reassess their own content. So now, you know, it's more education to national centers for them to just go through all their titles and remove, if needed, the road, let's say, mark. I don't know whether you have questions, and I'm sorry for the time. I think that was quick.